Okay, so the English Premier League is at threat at losing a spot for a team in the UEFA Champions League. That's been recent. And about the Premier League, I think it's an amazing league. I've grown up watching it, and the Premier League has had some excellent teams. You know, you've got the Arsenal Invincibles, the Manchester United, my favourite team with Ronaldo, and obviously the United side in '99, the Chelsea side in the second half of the 2000s, and the team that won the Champions League in 2012. And even the Man City team that have won titles in recent years. They've been a really good team to watch. But in the last 3 seasons since Chelsea won the Champions League in 2012, the performance of Premier League teams in the Champions League hasn't been up to scratch, in my opinion. It's been quite poor. We've had 2 Premier League teams from 2013, 14, 15 seasons make the Champions League quarterfinals, that being Chelsea and Manchester United, albeit in the same year in 2014. And Man United had a pretty easy draw, I've got to admit, so they were very lucky to make that Champions League quarterfinals as well. But what I think the problem with English teams recently is some Premier League teams are taking the Champions League for granted, and I'm mainly pointing to the likes of Arsenal and Man City. Now, Man City, they've had a hard draw, I'll admit. Some of the draws against them have been very unfair, and this is coming from a United supporter. Like, having, in 2013, them, Real Madrid and Borussia Dortmund in the same group, 2 teams that ended up making the semi-finals of the Champions League that season, is pretty poor. And last season they played a really good Barcelona team, so I can understand them losing to them. But the season before, in 2014, that Barcelona team wasn't at its best, and I thought Man City were more than capable of winning that game. But I watched those games, and they just weren't good enough. They just didn't perform, up to the standard as we've seen them. And Arsenal, I don't have as much sympathy for them. Yeah, they've had a few hard draws. They just lost to Bayern Munich 2 seasons in a row. But last season, they should have beaten Monaco. And, they're a much better team than Monaco, and they should have beaten them. And that brings me up to the point that, these teams seem to think that they're going to be there next year, because especially Arsenal, they just keep qualifying for the Champions League. They seem to think they're going to be there next year, and that's the point. There's no real hunger, desire, like, this is our last chance. This is our last chance to do something. There's none of that real desperation in the Champions League. So I'm starting to think that these teams need to feel more under threat in the Champions League in order to do better. Like, they need to think that, right, this is our last chance. We've got to do well in the Champions League, because we may not have a chance in the future. Just like Tottenham in 2011, Tottenham made the Champions League quarterfinals. So, and we haven't seen Tottenham in the Champions League since. But they knew that was a rare opportunity, and they were desperate, and they went as far as they could go, in that being the quarterfinals. So what I'm thinking the Premier League might have to start doing is they might have to start introducing like a playoff system, like I don't know, just to put more threat to those, just to say, like, your Champions League spot is not guaranteed. You can't just do bad in the Champions League and just perform in the last half of the season like what Arsenal have done, and just scrape there and just keep having the same results and just keep taking it for granted, because it's you're jeopardizing the league's chances to have more Champions League spots. No, I wouldn't mind having a playoff system. I'm not saying it's definite. I definitely have it, because there's financial implications. But say having the champions, automatically qualifying for the Champions League, and teams that make the Champions League final in the Premier League making the Champions League or whatnot, and then let's just say the champions make the Champions League and have, say, second versus seventh, third versus sixth, and fourth versus fifth, and the winner of those three go into the Champions League. And just say have one leg playoffs, and that means teams will they'll first of all there'll be more of a title race because there'll be none of this fourth place, third place guarantee. They'll know there'll be more of a desperation for the title. That means the title race will be really exciting, and also Champions League isn't secured, isn't taken for granted whilst they're in the Champions League because teams know that they may not get a shot and they'll be more desperate. Like Arsenal in last season, there was no desperation in that first game because they knew they were going to be in next season. So they, in that circumstance, with this playoff system, teams would be more desperate.